Hey, how's it going? Carlo here from AYCB, and today I'm bringing you a fun, kind of more laid-back video, which is going to be ranking the 10 current KeyForge houses. Couple things I want to mention before we get into the list. I want to be very clear, this is not at all supposed to be a ranking in terms of just like the worst to best houses. I'm not here to talk about like necessarily the win rates of the houses. For me, it is a personal list of not only the houses that I find the most fun to play as or against, but also just kind of how the houses are designed in terms of the health of the KeyForge as a game. So we're talking like, if there's a house that's either way too strong sometimes or way too weak, I might even push it further down the list, because ultimately this is my list of kind of the houses that feel the most fun and that I think do the best job of fitting into KeyForge. So again, there's going to be some, I know there's definitely going to be some picks that some of you don't agree with, for sure, but that's also the fun in some of these lists. I also want to thank all of you who have watched our last KeyForge video. I did not expect that type of response. As I mentioned there, I kind of fell out of favor with KeyForge for about a year during Worlds Collide, which was the third set, right around when the pandemic started. And I've been really enjoying getting back into it lately. So keep in mind also while I'm ranking these that the sets I've played the least of would be Mass Mutation and Dark Tidings, which are the two newest ones. But with that said, let's get right into the list, starting with house number 10, which is Brobnar. So it's unfortunate because I do like Brobnar in some ways. There's a lot that I liked about them in the first set. They're kind of the Mad Max style, fighting at all costs kind of house. Like, they have a lot of cards that encourage them to fight. They haven't been in the last two sets now. They were pretty weak, I found, in Worlds Collide. Out of the first, I opened 5 or 6 Worlds Collide decks. I think 4 of them had Brobnar. I didn't really enjoy playing them all that much. It wasn't specifically that they were weak, it was just that they also weren't as interesting. It feels like the house has hit a bit of a stale point around that second and third set. And yeah, there was a good thread actually for anyone who's not familiar with the KeyForge subreddit. If you go to reddit.com/r/KeyForge game, someone started an awesome series recently called Forging Futures, talking about the futures of houses. And there was a really great thread on Brobnar talking about how they can improve going forward, maybe focusing more on stuff like, the card Burn the Stockpile, which makes your opponents, you can make people like lose Amber. There's a lot of houses that focus on board presence and fighting. It's not just Brobnar, obviously Sanctum and Saurian do as well. But Brobnar has some unique mechanics, again, with the always incentivizing to fight, and maybe destroying your opponent's Amber could be another direction they could go in the future. But I did feel like they're a little bit weak and a bit stale right now. Excited to see where they can go later, but they definitely seem like the house that needs the most work right now. So for now, I have to leave them at my number 10 spot, unfortunately. But I do have to say, like, the artwork and the theme, the theme behind the cards and the house itself is really cool. So I think it's a great house for the game, but just right now needs a lot of work. On to my number 9, which is going to be Untamed. So Untamed came out the gates in Call of the Archons as probably the fastest house for gaining Amber. There's a lot of cards that just give you Amber bonuses and the bonus icons in the corner just for playing them, or there were cards that would give you 2 or 3 Amber. A lot of ways to spike Amber. You had cards like Key Charge and Chota Hazri for kind of key cheating. So that's always been a thing, and Untamed also has the kind of... They also kind of liked having a bit of a board presence as well, like I was mentioning with Brobnar, but usually weaker creatures that sort of power up the other creatures. There was the what were they called? Panpaka Anga and Panpaka Jaga, I think it was, from Age of Ascension, which you put on the opposite ends of your battle line, and they kind of buff all your other creatures, which was cool. They've had some other really cool cards like Mimicry, all kinds of cool stuff with Untamed, but I just feel like overall it's kind of in that... It's not quite... I wouldn't put it quite with Brobnar in the terms of it being stale. I'd like to see some new stuff from it, and I think the last couple sets where I've had decks with Untamed, I felt they're maybe not always the most interesting lately, and I think they've also, if I'm not mistaken, I think they've been in the set since in the game since the very first set. So yeah, overall, it's not my favorite play style, and I find that some of the cards are just, you kind of just play them and they gain you Amber, and you don't always have to figure stuff out, and then other ones are sometimes feel a little situational. I don't know, maybe not too many complaints, but it's just, I kind of like all the houses. It's kind of hard to rank these, to be honest with you, but yeah, Untamed does fall at number 9 for me. It almost made number 8. 8 is actually going to go to Sanctum. I previously had Sanctum as my number 9. I kind of waffled back and forth on these. Sanctum, to me, it's very beginner friendly, especially from Call of the Archons. It felt like the easiest, maybe not the easiest house to do well with, but I mean, having the cards that you know, all the creatures that have armor and ways that they don't take damage, and you can heal, and there's, you know, creatures with taunt that can protect other ones. You also had cards like Gorm of Om for destroying artifacts. Stuff like Cleansing Wave, where if you had a big board and a bunch of creatures that take it down, you just play Cleansing Wave, gain a bunch of amber. So it felt like maybe one of the easier houses, and I think it was good that they had a house like this in the first set, where it felt like most of my decks that had Sanctum, the Sanctum wasn't tough to play around, it was fairly easy, but it was just a reliably good house. After Age of Ascension, they didn't do too much to change it up. It still didn't get super interesting, but it has one of my favorite artifacts, which was Proclamation 346E. Just the theme, just the artwork, everything is just awesome, and it's a very, very good artifact. But I kind of fell out of favor. I think part of it too is I think most of my decks like have had Sanctum in them. It's the deck or the house I've had the most of, and especially because I'm not super fond of them, and I don't find them the most fun. After a while, I just got tired of seeing them, but they would have been lower on the list if it wasn't for the recent set, Dark Tidings, which has had some other new interesting cards, and I got to play a couple games with them recently, and that's why they've moved up. I think they did a good job of, you know, they got Sanctum out of there for one set, brought them back, and now I think they're a little more interesting. So excited to see what they have going forward. And of course, they had the, you know, 4 Horsemen in the first set, which everyone went crazy about when the game first came out. So yeah, lots of cool stuff still, but just not my favorite, most interesting house. On to my number 7, which, let me see, I almost forgotten here. Okay, 7 for me, 7 and 6 I waffled back and forth on too, but I kind of fell with 7 being Shadows. So Shadows is actually a very good house. Again, I'm not ranking these in terms of how good and bad they are necessarily. Shadows, especially in the first set, was probably the best or second best house. They've been there again since the beginning. I think they've been in all sets, yeah. The thing about Shadows for me is that, again, so like some of the other ones, they're getting to the point now where maybe just a little bit stale is maybe too harsh of a word too. I just want to see some new stuff, right? We think of Shadows as the house that has, obviously, Steel is the main mechanic, which is just so strong. We saw, you know, Bait and Switch getting nerfed or having the errata in the first set. Basically any card, those cards that sometimes steal you 2 amber, it doesn't seem like a lot, but you gain 2, the opponent loses 2, that's a 4 amber swing, so stealing is so powerful. And then the other main thing they're known for, obviously, is they're kind of elusive creatures. They have a lot of creatures that have like 1 or 2 health only, but maybe they're elusive, or they have a really powerful ability like Dipno Spymaster, which lets you, it's that Omni ability that lets you activate another creature. So you still have these creatures on the board that make your opponent want to get rid of them. Like Mac the Knife is another one I just thought of that's really good for that. But I just feel like, again, in the last little while, a lot of my, you know, especially the last couple sets that I've seen Shadows in, a lot of it just still comes down to the same stealing and stuff. And I guess for me, too, it's more that I like the houses that have a little more intricacy to them, a little more decision-making, a little more complexity, that don't just sort of play themselves. And I'm not saying Shadows does all the time, but because some of these cards have that steal effect, it just feels like a house that's very reliably good almost all the time and fairly easy to do well with. So again, to me, I just don't think it's the most interesting house. But if I was talking about strongest houses, it would definitely be much higher to the top. So yeah, that is, 2 more cards I have to mention for Shadows that I love, actually from the first set. Master Plan and the Sting. One of my friends has both of those in the same deck. Amazing artifacts. There's all kinds of really cool cards in this in Shadows overall. So yeah, I think they're just maybe a victim of having been in all the sets. I think maybe if they had been out a little more, I'd be maybe a little higher on them. So now we'll go on to my number 6. I believe we're on 6 now. Yeah, 6, which is Unfathomable. So this is the newest house from Dark Tidings, and it's hard to say. I mean, if they had been in more than just the one set so far, I might rank them higher. They are really interesting. I've been lucky enough to get them in 2 of my decks so far from Dark Tidings. They've got some really cool cards. I guess before I get into specific cards, we'll talk just more about their theme, but they're the underwater house, and they've replaced Dis as like the main kind of control house, I guess, in Dark Tidings. And it's basically like you're fighting them underwater. So not only has this tide mechanic come into play, which we'll talk about it more in another video some other day, but basically they have a lot of mechanics where they're exhausting enemy creatures, or saying that enemy creatures don't actually ready on their next turn. So it's like you're being slowed down fighting through water. The tide mechanic that I just mentioned there, like you can gain chains and stuff. So it is something that is there to slow you down. I really like that. And some of the new cards that I've seen, I felt so lucky. I opened a deck the other day that had Omnipus in there, which is that big 8-power creature that has all the tentaclids that come in there. Super cool card. Really enjoyed playing with that already. Kaup, which I mentioned in my other previous video, where it allows, when it's in play, your opponent can only play one card of each type on their turn. There's all these very restrictive things, tough to play against. It's a house that I could see going higher up on my list. I do think they're more interesting overall than Shadows. I don't know yet how strong, like how powerful they actually are. But yeah, they're definitely a fun, interesting house. The theme is good, and I just think it's a great addition to the game of KeyForge in general. So yeah, that's Unfathomable at number 6. So now on to my number 5, which is Saurian. I have a feeling I'm going to get some flack for this because not only are they obviously a very powerful house, but I know people just love them. And I have to say, if you would have asked me months ago or around when I stopped playing the game, you know, a year ago, I probably would have had them higher up on my list. I love the idea of the Saurians, these kind of like this society of sophisticated dinosaurs, and they've got philosophers and senators and their whole political system, and the Exalt mechanic that they brought in, we're putting amber on them to, you know, it's almost something to offset how good a card is. Sometimes you'll have an Exalt ability where you put amber on the creature as well, so that when it dies, your opponent's going to get the amber. But there's all kinds of tricky stuff you can do where you gain the amber or use it for forging keys. So I really like what Saurian does for the game. Unfortunately, I found that in Worlds Collide, when they first came out, they were maybe a little bit too strong. I felt like all the decks with Saurian were so, maybe not all, but a lot of them were so good. And once you get that board going, once you have 4, 5, 6 creatures out for Saurian, if your opponent doesn't have a board wipe card like a Gateway to Dis or you know, even something like Red Alert for Star Alliance or one of these cards, it just sometimes felt almost helpless. Like, what am I supposed to do if I can't get rid of this board once these creatures get out there? But there's that risk-reward style of, if you can get rid of it, you might actually get back a huge amount of amber. So Saurian to me felt like the more cards that are on the board too, it almost slows down the game because you're trying to figure out, okay, like even if you have a card that just kills one creature, you're trying to figure out which one of those Saurian guys is going to do me the most damage. So this is one of those ones where they're just not higher up on the list because I think at first they were almost too good, and it also sometimes slows the game down, makes for really long games. So I mean, the artwork on them is absolutely amazing. Just the theme of the house, the flavor text on the cards, you know, again, Dilophosaurus, Hastatus Raptor. You've got so many cool cards, and I just love the idea of these dinosaurs. But yeah, overall, there's just, again, and part of it is just that the houses that are ahead of it, I just like a bit more. So yeah, Saurian at number 5 could go up a lot more in the future, but that's where they sit for now. So number 4 is Dis. This is another one that might have been higher up on my list if it weren't for the fact that I've had very few decks with Dis. I think the first like 15, 20 decks I opened, I maybe got like 2 decks that had Dis. Yeah, they're such a great house. I feel they have this niche in the game that I know Unfathomable's kind of creeping in on that a little bit with that control aspect and slowing them down, and Dis has also kind of shared some characteristics with Shadows since the start in some ways. But they also have their own unique things, and I just love how, especially from a design perspective, I'm just so impressed with Dis because they have all these cards that seem like broken, like completely unfair. Like, remember from the first set, Control the Weak and Restringuntus, and even lately there's like Infernus. There's other cards that like let you take stuff back from your discard, like get a bunch of creatures back from your discard pile. There's all these cards that sometimes feel like, how is that even, like, that seems too strong. But there's a lot of other cards in the house that kind of offset it by not being as good, or that are more situational. And the other thing you realize after a while is that Dis does not do a very good job of gaining amber. So they're not an easy house to play well. Like, again, they have some of these really crazy cards sometimes. I guess I should mention the 7 Sins, which I haven't actually seen myself yet. They came out around when I wasn't really playing KeyForge much. But yeah, they just have this, I love the aspect of making your opponents like discard random cards from their hand, or you can like look at your opponent's hand and do stuff, or, you know, you got Lash of Broken Dreams from the first set, which makes their keys more expensive to forge. You had Drumble, preventing people from, like, all these very cool cards. I just think that, again, part of it is just a victim of I like the houses ahead of it a little more, but I think even just thematically too, the artwork, I think Dis has a really, really good spot in the game, and I think it is definitely one of the best houses overall, not only in terms of power level, but just like the fun of playing it and kind of having its own unique niche spot in the game that I feel like a lot of other houses can't quite match. So yeah, that is Dis, and if I have some more decks of them in the future, they could move higher up on my list. Number 3 is Star Alliance. This is another one that I really, really like. Such a cool house. I love the idea of the kind of humans and aliens working together kind of thing. Like you can see the kind of like human technology and like going out into space. You got all the like some of these characters are all wearing all kinds of crazy space suits, and you've got these cards like Encounter Suit and Quadricorder and all these, like I should mention, they're kind of the upgrade house, right? Star Alliance, by far the most upgrades, which are the ones that you attach to your creatures to power them up. Just the two I mentioned right there, Quadricorder and Encounter Suit, having those both on the same creature is just crazy because, yeah, I don't need to get into what the cards do, you probably know. They also have a lot of stuff with activating other houses, so like there's a lot of, you use a card's ability and it says like, play a non-Star Alliance card from your hand this turn, or use a non-Star Alliance creature in play. So I love that. They kind of feel the closest to Logos. It's the closest comparison I can think of to Logos, because they feel almost like a support house where they're there to help your other houses in the deck and your other cards in the set or in the deck work better. So especially like if you get out a bunch of upgrades and they stay out in play, you're going to cycle through and now there's not as many cards in your deck. So the Star Alliance feels like it's kind of powering everything else up. You have all these cards too that have like a play/fight/reap ability, so they're ones that can trigger at multiple times, which I really like. Just so many cool cards too, like Scientific Officer Kincan, there's Crash Muldoon. I really like what it does. I think of the two houses that got introduced in Worlds Collide, I did like Star Alliance a little bit more. Their power level too, it just feels like they can almost do everything. Again, I mentioned Red Alert is like an amazing board clear. I gotta mention one of my favorite Star Alliance cards here actually is Peace Accord. Is an artifact that I got in one of my decks. Super cool card. It's one of those ones, like, this is the kind of thing I love about KeyForge. It's not necessarily an amazing, powerful card. It's not one that's like always going to be good, but it's just a very cool thematic card and something that just makes both players have to think differently when they're playing, and it just gives that game a unique flavor when that card comes into play. So yeah, really like what I've seen from Star Alliance so far, and I hope to see some other really cool stuff from them going forward. My number 2, I know this is controversial, my number 2 is Mars. I know they haven't been in the last 3 sets. I know a lot of people say they're the worst house. I've got to disagree. And again, remember, this list isn't talking about just which houses are the best or worst. In my opinion, first off, Mars is either the most or second most fun to play. And that's again, for me, the unfortunate thing is that they are very inconsistent and it's very hit or miss. Like, I know the feeling. I've had people say like, oh, this deck, the Mars is so bad that the deck is almost unplayable. And I've had some decks like that where sometimes the Mars felt like you have so many of these situational cards, like, and that's the thing. They do have the most situational cards, I would say, of any house. But they have that aspect of, if you can get them out on the board and you can actually get those synergies going, it's so satisfying, so rewarding, it's so fun. All the abilities that they do are very thematic. If I think back to some of my favorite Mars cards from the very first, even in the whole game of KeyForge, really, like Uxlix the Zookeeper, where you can reap and you can archive one of your enemy's creatures. And then imagine having like a John Smith on the board with an Uxlix, which I had in one of my decks, where you use the Uxlix to do that, then use the John Smith to ready the Uxlix the Zookeeper to do it again, and then you've got things like Soft Landing and Squawker, which can make those all activate again. So there are games where you feel like your Mars does nothing, and then there are games where you feel like your Mars is almost broken and unfair. I've had games where I have like that John Smith Uxlix thing putting out with soft landings and just archiving my opponent's creatures, doing all kinds of stuff, and sometimes people are like, what am I even supposed to do against that? And sometimes it almost feels unfair, but I love the thematic. Like, there's so many cool cards with, like, again, abducting people, putting stuff in your archives. There's Deep Probe from the first set, looking at your opponent's hand, or you call out a house and they have to discard all the creatures from that. Like, there's just so much cool stuff, and I'm so sad that they haven't been in the last 3 sets. I believe someone mentioned in our last video that there was a podcast recently with one of the designers who mentioned that Mars is coming back in the next set, apparently. I hope that's true. Really excited to see what they do. And I just hope it's a little more consistent across the board so that, they don't get all this negative feedback saying the house is broken or unbalanced. And I really don't want to see it go away again. I think it's such an interesting house for the game and fits into this niche that no other house really has. And Martian Generosity in Age of Ascension was also awesome. Anyways, we get carried away here all day talking Mars. They're so fun, and they would probably be my number 1 house if they had been around for longer, or if they were just a little bit stronger. So yeah, that leaves my number 1, which you obviously know by now, is Logos. I don't know how much disagreement there's going to be on this, to be honest. It's such a good house. It's so much fun to play, and I feel like I've never, ever, ever had a deck where, like, I've never had a deck with Logos where Logos is the weakest of the three houses, it feels like. The Logos is there. I kind of mentioned this in my Starline section there. Logos feels like a support house. They're there to draw cards, archive cards. You know, you're basically cycling through your deck. You have cards like Mother that allow you to draw more cards at the end of your turn. I love cards like Sloppy Lab Work is just an interesting design because you have to archive and then discard, but depending when in the turn you play it, if you've played enough cards, you might not have to resolve the discard part. There's all these really cool cards that have like timing things. I mean, in the first set we had Library Access, which obviously ended up being nerfed, and Help from Future Self and Time Travel and that kind of thing. Strange Gizmo, one of the most interesting cards in the entire game for me. I had it in one deck in the first set. It's that artifact where when you forge a key, destroy every other creature and artifact in play. Super situational, right? Like, you might not want to do that, but once the artifact's in play, once you forge that key, that's going to happen. Super interesting card to play around. And then recently I got a deck from Mass Mutation that has the Archivist. Archiving is one of my favorite mechanics in the game because, okay, so we talk about, the game has obviously the unique deck aspect, and sometimes you have these decks that feel like they don't work. I found that even my low SAS ranking decks that are tough, eventually, if you have Logos or ways to archive cards, I find that I can usually find a way to make those decks work. I've had decks where I lose the first like 8 or 10 games, but after a while I realize, okay, when I'm playing, I gotta be archiving certain cards because in this game, you're always discarding cards that you can't play or the timing doesn't make sense, and Logos, I don't want to say it fixes a lot of potential broken decks, but I feel like that's part of the reason why they haven't taken it out of the game yet, is like there's a lot of these decks where you have that one board clear card and you know if you get that at the beginning of the game when there's nothing on the board and then it goes into your discard pile, that might be a waste. But if you're able to archive it and then pull it out right at the right time, or same with these key cheating cards that you can forge on your own turn, Logos just lets you kind of break the game. It almost feels like it lets you break the rules of the game more than anything and just tweak the way your decks work. And again, it's just one of those fun, reliable ones, and thematically speaking, like, it's kind of like that, there's no ethical, moral kind of ground that they won't sort of trod over, right? I mean, it's almost like the pursuit of knowledge and experimentation at absolutely any cost, you know, fusing humans with robots and all kinds of weird stuff. I love this house. I love what it does for the game. I think it's it's a great beginner-friendly house in many ways, but also has a lot of room for kind of like some higher level strategy. And it's one that I honestly don't think should be going anywhere anytime soon, unless they kind of have a house that's going to replace that. Because, I mean, there's other houses that kind of dabble in the archiving a little bit. You know, Dis has the odd card that can archive something from your, like, your discard pile. Mars, I think, has a bit of archiving, like I mentioned. I think there's the odd one in maybe, is it Starline? So I don't remember now. But if they get rid of Logos, something else has to, you know, one of the other houses has to adopt that archiving or maybe drawing cards more to replace them. But yeah, that is it. That is my 10-1. Keep in mind, again, this was just my personal ranking in terms of how fun they are, how much I enjoy playing the houses. There's a bit of how powerful they are in there, but for the most part, this is just kind of what I enjoy. I'm curious to hear what you guys think. Am I totally off base here? Have I got the list completely backwards compared to you? How close am I to your picks? Let me know how you'd rank the 10 in the comments below. And also keep an eye out. I want to say thank you again to everyone who watched our last KeyForge video, the one I put out, the getting back into KeyForge in 2021. I really appreciate all the feedback and all the comments and suggestions. Was not expecting that, but thanks to you guys. I do have some other stuff planned for the future. If you saw our channel update video, we're going to be moving studios, so there might be a bit of a lag in the next week or two, or coming weeks, but eventually I do want to put out a video that looks more in depth at Dark Tidings as a set. I'm also going to do a video on the just mulligan aspect of KeyForge, basically KeyForge went to mulligan kind of thing. So yeah, if you guys have any other requests, any suggestions, let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, thank you as always for watching, and I'll see you next time.